So it has said, it does say. So thank you, Harish, and welcome to everyone. We are very glad you could join us. My name is Manjula Padmanabhan, and I'm the moderator for today's session. I have not moderated a session before, so I'm likely to stumble a bit. Prakriti Foundation is an arts and culture NGO in Chennai, founded in 1998, and it has been a space where scholars, researchers, artists, critics, poets, and filmmakers have been able to present their work to those who engage with it on serious terms. One of its 4 annual festivals, Poetry with Prakriti, features eminent and emerging poets from India and abroad, presenting to small, intimate audiences at venues in the city: schools, colleges, cafes, galleries, boutiques, banks, IT parks, green public parks, and other commercial establishments. Of course, due to travel and public gathering restrictions, Poetry with Prakriti has been online for the whole of this year and much of last year as well, with readings on the Saturdays of on most Saturdays of the month, bringing you poetry via your computer or smartphone screen. We are very mindful of video conferencing fatigue. So these are short events, generally around 15 minutes of reading and followed by Q&A with a poet. As part of our festival, we do a session remembering poets who are no longer with us, which started with a reading honoring Margaret Mascarenhas. And in the months ahead, we hope to be able to have a more conventional festival. And the Prakriti Foundation hopes to bring you many more poets, some well loved, others who have not yet had a wider audience. We will take questions after the reading. Feel free to chat with each other and comment in the chat section, but questions for the poet must only be typed in the Q&A section, not in the chat box. Please keep your questions brief and, if possible, connect them directly to the poems which have been read. We'll try to take all questions that come up, but of course that might not be possible. This week, our poet is Peter Griffin. Peter is a writer and editor and poet, though he tries very hard to avoid being called a poet. I have been friendly with Peter for many years, but we have hardly ever actually met. He lives in Bombay. I sometimes live in New Delhi and sometimes in the US, and a lot of my time is in the air traveling between. Not really. Peter has worked primarily in advertising and journalism with a bit of radio and TV. He likes experimenting with online communities and volunteers with NGOs when he can. He calls himself an amateur artist, but I will tell you that he has the heart of an artist and the eye of a sculptor and the hands of a sculptor. I've seen a number of very, very charmingly modeled items that he makes, and he reveals to his friends on Facebook. He is a keen gardener, and again, I would say that what I've seen of his gardening online shows that he is not just a gardener, he is a friend to little creatures and insects that appear in his photographs of his garden. And he's working towards building a stable web of talk shows. The ones I've attended are Poetry with Prakriti, Table Talk, and the Prakriti series called Drama, Discourse, Dialogue, which were focused on my collections of published plays. I want to go back a moment to what I mentioned, Table Talk. Peter was the host and continues to host an extraordinary collection of writings and photographs from accounts from friends on Facebook called Simple Recipes for Complicated Times, which I think started off as a very gentle effort on Peter's part to learn how to cook. That started last year and has snowballed into an incredible universe of shared recipes. And I'm going to end here and ask Peter to read, but I want everyone to know that Peter is a poet, but he is many other things. Amongst them, I would say, a lovely human being. And I'm glad to have met and to have known Peter. So Peter, would you start, please?
Thank you so much, Manjula. And thank you so much also. I know you don't do much of the moderation kind of thing. And thank you so much for agreeing to moderate this session. It means a lot. And in a way, I mean, we've got our positions reversed because I've moderated a few of the drama discourse dialogue things as well.
Mm-hmm.
It's very odd to be the person whose name is on the poster. So I'm more used to being an organizer and a curator and occasionally interlocutor. But yes, thank you very much. And thank you, Prakriti, for this, for persuading me to do this. And thank you, Manjula. And I'll start off now.
Yes.
I'm going to start with a number of very short poems. And this one is called Quest. I originally wrote this for Philip Nikolaev, a poet, a Russian-American poet, who asked me why I don't call myself a poet. And I've subsequently also dedicated this to Manjula and R. Sriram, who have unfailingly introduced me as a poet, even as I try to sort of hide behind the words. Called Quest. I search for poetry by writing it. Nonsense verse, parody, doggerel, always hoping that now and then a poem will find me. This one is called, the title is an homage to John Morris, who wrote Typed with One Finger. This is called Typed with One Thumb. And as background, it won a contest for SMS poetry. And SMS, as those of you who remember, had to be poems that were 160 characters long. Mm-hmm. So this is called Typed with One Thumb. Cellular creature, now part of my DNA, gladden my heart, beep.
I love that. Thank you.
An untitled poem. It's not you, it's me, she said. Years later, I realized she was right. It's not me, it's you, I said. And then I let her go. This one was written for Eunice D'Souza just after she passed away. And it's based on a poem that she wrote. Eunice had this remarkable facility for writing really short, very tight poems, and this is an attempt to go there. Eunice was the teacher in my college, and I regret never having accessed the poetry side of her. This is called From That Backbench Hiding Place. From that backbench hiding place, too shy to admit to writing poetry, to not quite selling soap, but close, and writing greeting card doggerel. If I'd risked facing your epi, maybe this wouldn't have been 48 words too many. Night Vision is this one, the second last of the very short poems. Night Vision. In my dreams, I don't need my reading glasses, but I keep them by my bedside, just in case. The last of the very short poems, Cube. Draw lines in the dirt, build walls around it, add a roof, fill it with things borrowed from the universe. Now, call this cube of air home.
Very nice. Thank you for that, Peter. I'm wondering whether you want to talk a little bit about how you end a very short poem. How do you know that it has come to its conclusion?
It just feels complete when you've got there. Sometimes it's just words that have been playing in your head and you get it all together and it lands in place. And I think a lot of the very short poems are a result of having spent many years in advertising as a copywriter, where you had to be brief. Your brevity was rewarded.
Of course,
right. Of your consumer. And it's been something that's got in the way of my other writing in many ways, because I find it really hard to write long.
Really? Okay.
Writing long is always a huge effort for me.
Well, the thing I like about short poems, and I love about yours, is the amount of feeling you pack into such a very limited handful of words. And it's because I remember once I asked you, how does one assess a poet or a poem, especially if the person writing it does not think of herself or himself as a poet. And one of the points you made was the use of the accurate use of words. And I do think that is what you demonstrate in your poetry. It's not big words, it's not fancy words. It is words very carefully placed to make sense where they fit. Because our time is limited, I think you should go further now with your poems.
This is a small set of poems about places. The first one is called Lonar, Lonar 1, because there are two Lonar poems. Lonar is a lake in Maharashtra, a lake that was formed by a meteorite strike hundreds and thousands of years ago. And it's a perfectly circular lake in its own little hole in the ground. So Lonar 1, acne scar, beauty spot, star rock in your heart. Lonar 2 is when you wander around the bottom of the crater, there are a number of temples there from a very long time ago. So Lonar 2 is about that. Stone temple ruins testify to mortal love for God. White paint proclaims Sanjay's more recent crush on Reena. Sunset at Bundi. Bundi is in Rajasthan, and I was sitting on a hill above the town. Sunset at Bundi. A cold evening drifts down from the Aravalis. 1 year is warm. Science would insist that it's a cheap phone heating up. I know what it really is. You called to share the sunset. It's a poem about a place called Haflong, which is in Assam. Haflong. The clouds here aren't lonely. They caress hillsides, embrace trees, play with leaves. They lounge on the roads, rising lazily to let a car pass, settling down again even before the tires go around the corner. They talk to the flowers and play with the dogs. And I hear, in partnership with campfires, disorient the birds in nearby Jatinga so that tribesmen can club them out of the air. They laze, cradled like pet cats, in the laps of high valleys. Damp with promise, they leave traces of their passage in the grass and in the smell of the carpets. The clouds wander here, but it's only me that's lonely. And this is a Bombay poem to include the places. A lot of my poems are about Bombay because I've lived here most of my life. It's called a Bombay Second. It's the time between the light turning green and the first impatient honk. It's the time he says it will take to find that file. It's how long a wedding procession or a plaster god or a funeral will block the road. It's the time you could give an ambulance, siren imploring to pass, but don't. It's the time by which you miss your train, which costs you a red mark and 1/3 of a day's leave. It's the time a taxi driver says it will take to fill his tank, time he never had when his meter was up. It's the time a poet wants from you. And this is the last Bombay poem, and this is a lighter one. Bombay Winter. Bombay winter is a few days in December or maybe January. It's when you can take your leather waistcoat out of the closet and not have to take it off all day. When you're happy to put on a suit for a wedding. When walks are not instant perspiration. Bombay winter is when you can forget to turn on the fan and not notice. When you step out of the air-conditioned office in the evening and it's cooler outside. When in late night and early morning trains and buses, commuters want the windows down. When that peculiar headgear, neither scarf, nor earmuff, nor cap, nor bonnet, but a bit of each, usually wool in bright colors, wraps its way around heads and ears, because that's where the cold gets in. Bombay winter is that memory of that February day in 2008, or was it 2007? And why is there this not on a plaque somewhere? When Delhi was 9.8 degrees centigrade and Bombay was 9.1. And you laughed at the visiting publishing folk huddled in shawls. And of that day in 2015, when a Bangalore wit mocked it and then found that that evening, Bombay was 2 degrees colder. Bombay winter must always appear in quotes. Bombay winter. That was the last of those poems.
Thank you, Peter. I loved the one on Bombay's winter, but because I read it for the first time just last night, and was very amused to remember that, yes, Bombay has that 1 or 2 hours of winter compared to Delhi's miserable cold. But I did also really appreciate the one on clouds. And while we're reading, I felt sad that participants here, the audience here, cannot see the poems. And I'm wondering whether in some future sessions of Prakriti, Poetry with Prakriti, we can be scrolling the poems, because it's so helpful to be able to read them, because I have them in my head now, having read them over the last couple of days. Do you want to introduce your next set of poems and tell us a little bit about the people they're about?
So I write very, very few political poems, and I'm just going to do 2 of those. One is for Tenzin Sundyu. Tenzin Sundyu is Tibetan and has been an activist for Tibet's freedom from China. And he's done some very bold protests when Chinese dignitaries have been visiting India. And this was written at a time when, once more, Tenzin had been, confined to quarters, so to speak, because he was planning some kind of protest. And this is essentially, it was just to have fun with the words, because there's a lot of wordplay in here. And this is perhaps a poem that is best read off the page, but I'm still going to try it here. Tenzin Sundyu has been detained by unavoidable circumstances. He regrets that he will not be in time for tea and dhokla. No T-square for him. Tenzin Sundyu won't be perpetrating such anti-national stunts as a satyagraha at the Sabarmati ashram. We have our dandi ready should he attempt to march. Tenzin Sundyu won't be jumping in on Jinping or lowering large banners and embarrassing the Oberoi. Tenzin won't be at the table when we put out the good porcelain. He won't be bringing his bhool into our china shop. Tenzin Sundyu won't be walking to Lhasa. No apso factor for the running dogs of democracy. Tenzin Sundyu won't be causing any undue tension. Tenzin Sundyu has been detained. And the second of the poems, it's called Invocation. I wrote it originally for Charlie Hebdo, the victims of the Charlie Hebdo killings, and for Perumal Murugan, who was denied platforms, and subsequently have dedicated it to writers we've lost: Narendra Dabolkar, Govind Pansare, M.M. Kalburgi, and Gauri Lankesh. Invocation. Let us then render unto religion what it has lost. Let us agree that the earth was made in 7 days, that winged humaniform creatures act as emissaries, that women was made from man's rib. Let us accept that the rules were personally carved on stone by himself. Let us reject the notion of a round planet. Let the sun, the moon, and the universe revolve around us again. Let us also reject anesthesia and all surgery barring interspecies skull transplants. Let us endorse the idea that many hands make God's work, and that conception can be divine, or through several divinities in succession. Once more, let us buy our brides and burn them when their husbands die and they are of no use. Or maybe just let us discard them, leave them to the company of others now also useless in a town by a river. And let us not forget to cover them in modesty when they live, lest they be coveted like our other goods. Let us not produce the images of what the divine has created and also his prophets. Let us not question, let us not offend. Let us just kill each other in defense of imaginary friends. Amen. Tathastu. Amen.
Thank you. That's an extraordinary poem. Do you want to keep going, or do you want to go to the next set, or do you want to stop and talk about it?
Yes, I think. These, or should I go to the next set?
No, I don't think we need to talk about this. They say so much already. Go ahead, please.
Okay, so I have a couple of poems about a theme that keeps recurring in my poetry, which I realized when I was putting the set together for today. And these are two of those poems. This one's called Losing. That place with my first backpack. Perhaps I was only discovering the joy of discovering. It was special nevertheless. I have always wanted to go back, but from what I hear, it's unrecognizable now. Another paradise that cannot be regained. That house my great-grandfather built on that street named for him on that other coast. Properties sold by descendants less hardworking before I could find my roots. An inheritance I did not inherit. Our place, which I can never go back to because there is no us. But which taking someone else to would mean losing that too. No matter, it remakes itself each year, and soon it will be discovered by some young backpacker. This one is called Search, and it's about, well, things that are happening in this country right now, sort of in a sideways kind of way, and also about myself. Go home, you say. Where is that, I ask? Is it where I was born? That hospital and the house I was taken to next, they don't exist anymore. And the same is true for the next 3 houses. And no doubt subsequent homes will crumble too, or be redeveloped. And they're gone too. Dust to dust, as they wanted. They in turn were born in one place, lived in many others, died elsewhere. More than I have. And their forebears likewise. I come from migrant stock, many migrations. Which home will you send this half-breed to? I still seek soil to grow in, to decay in, to return to.
Thank you. That was wonderful. Could I just make a little point here? I think that the thing that that really marks your poems as your poems is that when you say us, you speak for so many people. You're not just speaking of yourself in the plural. It's not the royal we, it is the every we. And I really appreciate that about your poems. I think you can go ahead, please.
I was thinking about this last night and chatting with Nilanjana and then previously with another friend, and that I really had not thought about these as speaking for anyone but me. And it's when you write, and I mean, and you as a prolific writer know that, and especially with the many kinds of writing that you do, you write whatever you have in mind. Once you set it out there, people will see it in different ways, and some of them will make it their own in ways that you never ever thought they would. And that's nice too.
Sometimes.
Sometimes. Okay, break the mood here and do a couple of lighter poems because it's rather somber. So this one is called Summer Sonnet. I like experimenting with form. It's a very good exercise to work within the constraints of a form. Haiku is very attractive to me for that reason, and ghazals, and I've been struggling for years to write a good ghazal. But the more Western forms of poetry, sonnets and so on, come to me a little more easily, perhaps because
Mhm.
they have evolved in English, whereas a ghazal does not lend itself as readily to English as it does to, say, Urdu, or haiku
Yeah,
to
but
Japanese.
I was thinking that just as you spoke about it, I was thinking that maybe English doesn't have the elasticity of Urdu words. Um, there's, I mean, of course, there's a tremendous width, the breadth of expression in English words too, but it seems that the little I understand of Urdu uh, through listening to occasional music, uh, the way that words kind of transform as they sing them, I don't know that we get that out of English. But as one of the audience members has asked for you to read one of your ghazals, so maybe you might do
Uh,
that.
I will check out the ghazal from the list.
Yes, I know. I know. You said you had.
Okay, but here, okay, so this is a ghazal which was written uh, when Javed Akhtar had written a ghazal about free speech and things like that, and about voices being suppressed. And Gulzar had written a ghazal in response to that. And this was my response to both of them. And it's called While You Still Can. It's not quite a ghazal. It does not follow all the rules quite as well. It doesn't have the takalus at the end and stuff like that. But While You Still Can, a ghazal for Javed Saab and Gulzar Saab. These aren't good times in this our land. Step up, stand up now, create while you still can. Do you write? It's time to free your hand. Write truth right now, write straight, because you can. Do you make music? Good. Now you're the band. Sing of how we can hate, or we can beat hate. Sing loud. You can. Do you tell jokes? Take the mic, woman. Mock them and they deflate. We know you can. Got art that can help us understand that we can't abdicate? You must. You can. Gather your courage. It's time to take stand. No, don't hesitate. You know you can. These aren't good times in this our land. Don't wait till it's too late. Right now, we can.
Hmm.
Uh, yeah, so the other lighter poems, two of them,
Mhm.
are both also experiments with form. This is called Summer Sonnet. Like corporate annual reports, odes to summer are, I confess, not among my favorite thoughts. They're things I write under duress. But having decided I would write one, I sit, sweating, with pursed lips. Should I make it funny? A light one? Glib? Nonsensical? Even flip? Alas, I'm using up the quota of lines the classic sonnet permits. I wouldn't mind if it were shorter. A full 14 lines can be the pits. Only 2 more lines? What a bummer. Oh well, here's my poem. I hate summer.
Lovely.
And this is a very fiendishly difficult form of poetic form is the villanelle. And
Mhm.
this is called Villanhell, Villan, Hell.
Right, right.
Uh, I have always wanted to write a villanelle, just 5 tercets and 1 quatrain, but it's way too complicated to do it well. Many have done so, so I hear tell. So I've tried until it drove me insane. I so badly want to write a villanelle. If I give up, I will languish in poetic hell. To notice me, real poets will never deign, but it's way too complicated to do it well. I juggle the words, but they never gel. I turn them all sideways and upright again. I have always wanted to write a villanelle. The performance anxiety I just cannot quell. I'm in really, truly physical pain, but it's way too complicated to do it well. I scream and I shout and I weep and I yell until they can hear me in the next lane. I have always wanted to write a villanelle, but it's way too complicated to do it well. So that was a little
Lovely.
more about not being able to write a villanelle.
Well, you've certainly succeeded.
Yeah. And the last set is a set of poems of remembrance. to two people who passed on and who meant a lot to me. The first is my brother, who passed away in 2015. And there are two poems for him. The first is called Gone, and it's a poem in four parts. Gone. 1. Dust on his wheelchair, a stash of his chocolates which you cannot bear to eat, his money box, which was always offered to anyone who asked. 2. Your shadow falls in unexpected places. There are holes shaped just like you in places you never went to. All that was centered around you now drifts. 3. Grieving is not a process. You do not recover from losing what cannot be replaced. The loss and the grief are now you too. Always. Until you go to. Meanwhile, you learn, you try to learn, to not let it show. 4. It feels profane to write about you. The second poem is called Happy Birthday, and I wrote it on his birthday. How old would you have been today, boy oh boy? I'm guessing you would have said, 2-year-old child I am. Or your other favorite age, 16. So many things stood still for you. So many things stayed unchanging. Like your money box, which you preferred to anyone who needed to pay for anything. You knew there was always going to be money there and that money could pay for anything. The bananas dad pretended he had no cash for, the small phone on which only you would talk, from toys you wanted, the keyboard you cried about, the shoes that would never bear your weight. The very many little treasures which fill a cupboard, which was a gift from a hospital where you charmed everyone when you were there. There was always enough for all these things, and you know what? You were right, boy oh boy. Your birthday was the only one we'd have a party for. And being July, it would rain. And we'd wonder, will they come? And you'd be sure they would. And they would come, bedraggled. They would fuss over you, bring you red things or music things. You were right there too, boy oh boy, that money box always had money in it and you never aged, despite all those birthdays. You would always be our little boy. That was the deal, boyo, that you would always be there, that things would always stay unchanged for you. Happy birthday, boyo.
Thank you for that. Thank you, Peter.
A few years ago, I lost my first boss. Her name was Margaret Mascarenhas. She was a poet. We did a reading honoring her here. She was an editor, a writer. She was a nurturer of strays of all kinds. She took care of people. And we'd meet regularly whenever I was in Goa. We never talked very much in between, but we'd always hang out. And every time anyway, the poem will explain that. It's called Photographs We Never Took for Margaret Mascarenhas. Each time we'd talk for hours, and when saying goodbye, also say, damn, we forgot to take a picture together. This last time I remembered, but also knew that this was not how you'd want to be pictured. So I'll keep in my mind's eye that 80s young woman in tights, floral skirt, scarf, sitting cross-legged in the big chair like only a small person could, grinning amusement at this boy who wanted a job, then protecting him as he tried to fit in, while you told stories of playing volleyball in Venezuela, your brown belt, tutoring Joan Baez's kids in Spanish, or the older woman, decades later, all pastels, dissecting Goa as we drove to the little place near your home. Secret, you can't tell anyone about it. With the great food and where you sometimes sang, though you didn't that night. Or the walkthrough at the art center while you talked of another one in a jail. Or even that second last illness, which knocked you down but didn't lay you out. Those visuals will stay here inside. And this ragged social media poem will have no picture of us. Margaret was dying of cancer, and she knew it was coming, and she'd set her life in order. And this was a poem I wrote while I was visiting her in her last few days, and which I actually got to show her a week before she died. It's called.
I didn't know that. That's great.
Yeah, this is the one poem that I wrote for her that I actually did show her, and yeah. So this is called Haunting Code, and I think it explains itself. Haunting Code for Margaret Mascarenhas. What about the haunting code, you said? When my eyebrows asked the question, you explained. If there's anything to haunting, how will you all know it's me? A bird, I said. A bird, you agreed. A phoenix, I said. Because, I didn't say, my heart aches and I want you to rise. Would a made-up bird work, you said? We agreed that it would, because where is it written that you can only come back as a scientifically named species? And imagine birds can fly into dreams. It has to be something specific, you said, so that you'd know for sure. A weaver bird, I said, winding a red ribbon into its nest. What are those, you said? And I told you about my garrulous monsoon neighbors who wake me every morning while they thread grass stalks into their new homes. Are they like, and you called out to your sister, what are those birds that build the nests that are works of art? Bowerbirds, she answered. We talked a while of bowerbirds in this old home you restored from ruin and made your own, surrounded by love, surrounded by love. I'm not afraid to die, you said. Closing your eyes and not waking up, that's okay. I don't care about legacy, you said. When I'm gone, I'm gone. I'll have to look up weaver birds, you said, and then, eyes closed. I'm leaving this to you guys. Just decide and let me know. And so that night, we, who you flew with now and then, talked and decided on kingfishers. Going, swift, energetic, waterbirds, iridescent, never gaudy, tiny. Just then, a lone firefly circled over my outstretched legs and explored the balcony before heading back to the coconut and banana groves with the river running by them. And so, the next day I said, a kingfisher or a firefly? I like kingfishers and fireflies, you said, and smiled, eyes closed. That settled then.
Wonderful, really wonderful. Thank you for all of these, Peter. Are we going to pause to let people ask questions, or would you like to? I don't want to break the mood. I think we'll have we need to have our Q&A, I think. So maybe we can go ahead. Really. So so for those of you who have any questions, which I very much doubt we have questions, I suspect that most of us would just like to hear more poems, Peter. But if you have any questions, this is the time to send them in. Please put them in the Q&A box, and we'll ask Peter to read something more.
Okay, I'll read one more while.
Yes, there is two questions have come in.
Oh, there are questions?
Okay. One person says, more poems, please. And says, I would ask questions, but Pete made me cry, in brackets, in a good way. Shivagami Velayangari asks, have you collected all these poems into a book, Peter? And I suspect many people will be asking that question. But Peter, would you like to read one more poem before you answer that question, please?
The question is easy to answer. No, I haven't.
Okay.
I've actually submitted very, very infrequently. I've only submitted once to an anthology and got rejected, and a couple of times to newspapers, which printed a couple of poems, but never submitted to magazines, etc. I just never had the confidence in my poetry to collect them. So no, there is no book.
But we have to hope that there will be.
I hope maybe sometime, yeah. Okay.
I think everyone would like you to read another poem, Peter. I know that you will end with a poem, but okay. if before you get to the end poem, you would read another one, I think we'd all be very happy for that.
All right, so this is two short poems then. This is called Sudden October Shower. The air is steam, but still. The sky, the dull bronze of an unpolished figurine. Distant thunder rumbles. Lower now, darker, quarreling for space. Invisible lightning snaps out. A breeze born in the south sends cold tendrils into leaves. The mango tree, startled, shivers. Not caring that it's October and they're not supposed to be here, the clouds let go their burden. The mud exhales again. And one more very recent one, which is untitled at this point. We are kinder now. We have learned that everyone is beautiful, or that no one looks nicer than anyone else. And I am all for this. So how do I explain that feeling when I look at you?
Yeah. That's wonderful. Thank you, Peter. I see that there, Soumya Mukherjee asks, what do you do with a poem that has lived it to its day? What do you do with a poem that has lived its day?
I'm not quite sure what lived its day means in that context. Perhaps you could expand on that, Soumya?
To be or not to be, says Soumya Mukherjee, that occasional poet on a social media forum, or to keep your sacred secrets tucked safely away for an audience that values each word and each silence therein. Again, I don't think that's quite a question. That's a lovely remark.
I think I get that. And I've done a bit of both. Initially, I didn't show my poems to very many people at all. And then I started showing poems anonymously on forums that I was present on right from the days, bad old days of Rediff chat rooms and stuff like that. And then in an anonymous blog, and subsequently in forums that I helped run, because I started realizing that it was important to have community as a poet. It was important to be able to workshop, to be able to get feedback, to go back again to poems and to look at poems through the eyes of others. And all of these things. So there's some poems that I write 100% only for me, and I never show them to anybody. But I do find a lot of value to just putting stuff up there, even as works in process, and which you come back to later. And I do put some of these up. I do a lot of this with the lighter stuff I do, which I consider, and perhaps this also fits into the question of poetry that has lived its day, things that comment on things that exist at that very moment in time, light stuff. I have this, because I play with words a lot, I can rhyme very easily and do these little funny, silly poems. And those have their moment and they're gone. And I don't bother to save those because I probably won't even remember what they're about if I looked at them later. But there's all of these, the ones I consider that I like to save and keep. I save them and keep them because I think that they live beyond the thing that prompted them to happen.
Shivagami asks about Kafarati, the website that you used to run, the blog. It was a blog. Would you like to talk about?
Yeah, it was a blog, it was a forum, it was many things. It still exists in a way that is not as alive as it used to be. But the whole point there was to have community. I think, see, one of the things that I missed out on, despite having Eunice for a teacher in junior college, is I never was really part of Bombay's poetry community. I didn't know it existed. And
Mhm.
it was a set of luck and circumstances that people got in there, people who were Eunice's students who perhaps were less bashful about their work than I was, and who showed Eunice their work. And some of them through Eunice and through others became part of this, were adopted by and mentored by people like Nissim Ezekiel, Dom Moraes,
Adil,
uh,
Adil Jasawa.
Eunice, Adil, who's still one of the
Yes.
most generous, kind people there are,
Mhm.
who, very nurturing. And those people in turn have become mentors to other people like Arundhati and Ranjit and Jerry, uh, Menka Shivdasani, who's been a huge, uh, friend and supporter over the years. One of the people who encouraged me, all of these. So I missed a lot of that. And and I guess Caferati, when we started out, was a way of trying to find that forum in different kinds of ways, to find community, to find people who could read
A
and
platform,
appreciate.
right.
Yeah.
I wonder if you'd like to say a little bit about memorizing poems, because we were talking about that before the session began. I had said that I was very grateful that as a child in school, we were all made to memorize poems. And we didn't like it at the time, but how important it has been over the years to have that bank of poetry in my head. And I wondered if you'd like to say a little bit about memorizing poems.
So, I mean, I have actually found that very difficult to memorize poems. Stray lines will stay with me here and there. And and I think that the internet has actually been a bad thing in that sense, because it's so easy to find the reference when you remember bits of it. So I can go back to them. And I wind up remembering very little, or remembering it whole. Uh,
Mhm.
and I think that it's also training memory. I mean, in school, the rote kind of learning that you had to do, and elocution competitions and things like that, they have a value. And but I think that the way that poetry is sort of pushed down our throats a lot in school, and also, I mean, when I was growing up, the kind of poets you read, you're reading, I mean, I'm sorry to pick on this one instance, but it fits so well. Daffodils. Who in India knew what a daffodil was? Uh, Things like finding, shall I compare thee to a summer's day? Summer's days are hot. I don't, I don't want, I mean, and hot not in a way that I would like to compare a woman to, but things like that, where I think that the poems that we were uh, exposed to, and I think that younger people now get a far more variety in their poems and get poems that are rooted around them. But so many of us also, I think, leave poetry behind once we're out of school and college, because it has been made something you have to study rather than
Mhm.
something you can sit down or just relax and enjoy, or find meaning in, rather than something that you have to pass and examine. I think that's the pity of that. So I have this uneasy relationship with memorizing poems, though as someone who's dabbled in theater and all that, I appreciate the value of memorizing and then being able to give it different things when you
Right.
bring them up again.
This is true. I'd like to make a shout out to daffodils, however, because I think the thing about poetry, and that even a poem as over taught as daffodils has done, can do, is it brings, even to those who have never seen a daffodil, it brings them to mind. And if a poet who belongs to a climate that doesn't produce daffodils can give us a poem as memorable and as easy to say as daffodils, then go for it. It's the thing is, it even that simple poem gave one such a sense of the poet, and the sense of reverie that a poet lives within. I think it speaks beyond its garden, that particular type of garden. And I think of you with your garden and your wonderful little creatures, and I can see the daffodils in them. You know, you have created your own daffodils. Meanwhile, Soumya Mukherjee has asked, is a clout or a community important then? What about those of us who are comfortable on the fringe?
It's important, I think, to have a community there for asking, to be able to find it when you need it. And I mean, look, all kinds of writers, we're all kinds of human beings exist. Some of us need people more than other people do. The community can be useful if you're writing for an audience. If you're writing for yourself, no one needs to, you don't need community, right? If you're writing for an audience, it pays to have, to understand what an audience thinks about it. If you think that what you have to say possibly has value beyond that moment, whatever you want to do at that point, right? And I think taking it from there, yes, it's useful. And if you don't want community, it's as easy as not joining a community. So
right. I was just thinking, as you said the words, if you don't want community, well, you won't be there.
yeah,
That I mean, this goes.
I missed it.
That it's true, and that goes with any kind of writing, even writing a diary. Those who keep a diary, you could argue that there is some sense that someone sometime later will read it. Otherwise, why? I mean, even if it's only oneself, why does one write it if not that it will be read at some point? It is a scratching on the wall. And I think anyone who writes anything has a sense that some eyes will read it. It is a mark, and if you've made that mark, then you have a sense that, you know, it's a footprint. You hope that someone will see it and recognize it. So one shouldn't hide from the awareness that if you write, you do want someone to read it. It is the sound in the forest.
Yeah.
You hope that there will be ears.
Yeah. Yes. And just to refer back for a second to daffodils, I mean, yes, the poem on Half Long references, wandered lonely as a cloud.
Yes, yes.
For a few years, I ran something that referenced Wordsworth in a different kind of way, which was called God Awful Poetry Fortnight. Because
yes, I remember that. Yes.
Whose patron saint was William Wordsworth because of what he said about that outburst of emotions. I can't remember the exact words right now, because a lot of people forget that the latter bit of what he talked about, which is recollected in tranquility.
Right.
Don't bother with that bit, because I encountered too many poems which were just the outburst, the flow of powerful emotion. And you need to, I mean, my way of looking at poetry has been always that you let it wander around in your head for a while, and then you put it down. That's the first cut, so to speak, that's on paper.
Right.
And then come back to it much, much later when it's old, which kind of also answers what Soumya was talking about when it comes to going back to poems, and where the poems have outlived their life, they were there for a certain reason. If you can go back to something like that, that served its use at that point, and it has helped you to come to terms with whatever has happened in your life, which caused it to be written and caused it to that particular outflow, then you can come back to it also in a different kind of way later and see if it serves a purpose beyond what it did for you.
Right. right. Um, uh, since we have a chat, this is in the chat box actually, so it should have come in questions, but anyway, it says, since we're talking about daffodils, I wonder why Marigold by Robert Graves never made it that big in India.
I'm sorry, but I must confess ignorance because I haven't heard of that one.
Soumya Mukherjee asks that.
I don't know, I'm afraid.
Well,
Well, a lot of what we learn, it depends on what's essentially been
yes,
in our syllabuses, right? The syllabi.
yes, right. Well, it is like nursery rhymes. If we all study the same nursery rhymes, we can make reference to them. But if we all learn different nursery rhymes, however much we enjoy them, we can't share them by referring to sheep that have got lost.
Yeah.
you know, it's part of learning a language is that you learn the things that are common within that language. And I would say that it is then up to us, that is all those of us who write, and those who read, to share the things belonging to a culture. So if we can't access daffodils specific to our culture, that's on us. It's not the fault of the poem that we haven't apparently shared ideas that are familiar to us and have become part of our language.
Mhm.
So I think poets like you, Peter, you need to make your poems, and this is why you need to publish. You need to make your poems part of the syllabus, so that the syllabus of shared ideas, and so that we can then refer to a line of your poetry, and anyone will know what we're talking about, just as we do with daffodils.
I mean, but yeah, on that tangent, what appears in syllabuses, syllabi now, particularly in India, is a very fraught subject, right? At various levels, you've had things like, the Ramayana, the thousand Ramayanas, the other things, what we study and everything, and what we consider important. There's a whole lot of stuff happening there but to
Well,
leave
we're
all that
we're
aside,
trying.
I think that the internet has made so much more accessible. All right. Yes, there's a lot of dross as well, but if you find the right filters at various places, I mean, that filter is a two-edged sword. If someone is filtering, they're also gatekeeping, and they may not be
Mhm.
gatekeeping in a way that's designed to be mean, but it is someone who is your avenue to that. But I think the kind of stuff that we see in translation, and the kind of things that we get to appreciate now because of the internet and the accessibility, because one of the things is about poetry is really that it's never a commercial proposition to write or to publish poetry either, right?
Mhm.
So if it was
Mhm.
really the only way you could access poetry was books that you bought, there would be a hell of a
Mhm.
lot of poetry we would miss. And there's so much that we can access now because of the internet, for which I'm hugely grateful.
True. And of course, a great deal of poetry is memorized via songs. You know, uh, a lot of what I think young people access in the way of uh, at least interesting, if not actually beautiful thoughts, is via songs. But I feel one of the many things that has happened as a result of the internet, perhaps as a result of the internet, is that the definition of we and us is also being stretched in such a way that one hardly knows who is being referred to when speaking of we and us, especially when other people uh, try to include among us those who we definitely don't feel close to. Um, and who, and I think one of the problems with trying to find local daffodils, if I might put it that way,
Mhm.
is you can't force daffodils on people.
No, yeah.
And I think there's a lot of forcing that goes on, which has to do with an intention to make a point. And that's very different to sharing a poem or a thought, because many people have loved it.
Mhm. Yeah,
All the more reason, Peter, that you need to publish.
this distinction between poetry and song or all of that, I find some of those areas, there's the way of defining this way, it's very sort of fuzzy. And knowledge was passed on via verbal thing, and having rhyme and rhythm, which is why I love form. I like playing with form, because it helps you to memorize, and it helps you to pass on. It helps you to find things that have a rhythm that people take joy in passing on as well. So I think there's a lot to be said for that. And people have talked about how Leonard Cohen or Bob Dylan are not really poets. Why should they be getting literature? But I think that they're great literature.
Yes,
The work, the passing on of culture, of heritage, of thought, of feeling in song is a
yes,
absolutely valid way, and I think it is, a lot of it is poetry.
yes, yes. I'm
I,
not sure
I
if we are reaching the limits of our
I think yes, are
session.
kind of over time.
Okay,
Maybe.
so I'm sure nobody wants us to end. Um, and maybe we'll have something to look forward to when you publish your book. So if you would end this, please, Peter, with one last poem, we can say goodbye after that,
Right.
please.
I've kept two tiny poems to end up with. Uh, One is based off a famous William Carlos Williams poem about plums. And I think if I just say plums, you know what I'm talking about. But this is just to say, I am unaccustomed to finishing the last mango in the refrigerator. It has begun to shrivel and will possibly rot. Forgive me, I will eat it now, less joyously than if you were here. And the other really tiny
Thank you.
poem,
Uh-huh.
which I thought perhaps we could just end in a slightly lighter
Mhm.
note than the very somber stuff I've been reading. Uh,
Well, let
this
me
is
just say,
place of
Peter, you are able to do somber with wit. And I think that is a beautiful ability.
yeah. Thank you for that.
Uh,
This is just to say that my version of this is just to say was also about, in a sense, finding a point at which I'm saying I can let go and I can eat that mango now. I'm not going to keep that mango there to rot and shrivel. It's a point of, it's a way of, it's a very recent poem. And it's a result of having dealt with a lot of stuff. And through meditation, my meditation teacher is here, my dear friend Shubha. And Nilanjana's frequent, you know, exhortations around the same lines as well. And this was a way of saying, yes, I'm not just going to live in that past, however beloved it was, and step into being able to eat the mango. But here's
right.
a tiny poem that
Mhm.
is about, touches on something that we talked about. And it's called I Left Some Poems in a Cab Today. If I was trying to make a living out of poetry, the title would have read, I left some poems in the train today.
Thank you, Peter. Thank you so much for that. Thank you, everyone, for being present, for listening, for responding. And I already have a couple of messages from a sister. I would not say which of my two sisters, insisting that she be allowed to read these poems in print. So I will leave us all with that. Thank you, Prakriti. Thank you, Ranveer, who I think is present. Thank you, Harish. And I'm going to thank Mira, who is not with us today, but she is always with us when the Prakriti Foundation is involved. So thank you, Mira, for always being there. And thank you everyone for attending, and especially again, Peter. Bye.
Thank
Bye
you.
to everyone.
Thank you so much for this. Thank you, Prakriti Foundation, Harish, Meera, Ranveer, and yeah, Meera, for the persuasion to actually come in and read. And thank you everyone who attended. I'm glad you did. Thank you so much. This has been lovely, and perhaps now I will sort of do this again.
Book. Book. All right then. Bye.
Bye everyone.